she go? Looking at 25 years since the Gulf War, so-called Gulf War, broke out in 1991. George W. Bush used Martin Luther King's birthday as the deadline for Iraq to get out of Kuwait, and then started bombing the day after, which is January 16th that year. There had been a march of about 12,000 people here in Portland, 12 to 15,000 people right here in Pioneer Courthouse Square that same week. And then right after the war broke out, a bunch more people protested. We're trying to revive that spirit and let everybody know that the U.S. is still in Iraq. We want them to get out, and we want this 25-year-long siege to end. Well, there's people here from different organizations. I'm with Peace and Justice Works. We started up about a year after the war ended, so to speak, the shooting part of the war. There are people from Portland Peaceful Response Coalition here, the Closed Guantanamo Coalition. We've got people from Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Veterans for Peace. So there's a number of groups represented. Well, it's probably not going to read very well on your camera, but there's a notebook over here with the history documents from the last 25 years of protests in Portland that outlines the history of what's gone on in Iraq, the sanctions, the no-fly zones, the bombing, the invasion, and then the third war, which started in 2014, ostensibly against ISIS. So we have 3 Iraq wars when we're talking about the Iraq War, and we're looking at 25 years of history. Some of the items that are in the notebook of history included a promotional flyer from the Coalition Against U.S. Military Intervention in the Middle East, or COSMINE, which organized that event in January of 1991. The second one is this flyer for the COSMINE weekly Friday vigils in Pioneer Courthouse Square, which they held in 1990 and 1991, and they were revived in 2001 by the Portland Peaceful Response Coalition every single week in Pioneer Square, including the Friday rally that is the feature of this show. The next one is a poster for a very ambitious peace march that started out with rallies on the east and west sides, and they both led up to marches that met up in Northwest Broadway in downtown Portland, and footage from that was used in the very first Flying Focus program before we even had the name Flying Focus. It was called Peace Action Network, and you're seeing the opening credits here in the background.
10,000 dead. Pardon me, Mr. Senator, did I hear you right? You say Saddam Hussein is a madman, and we can get him in this fight. You say there's no doubt of our victory, we'll come out far ahead. But what kind of victory will it be? With 10,000 dead, what kind of victory will it be? With 10,000 dead.
And in fact, Flying Focus's first show was even featured in the newspaper in this article here, talking about how we were about to take to the cable airwaves with our show. We also have a poster from a protest against the no-fly zones that were imposed by the U.S. over the north and south of Iraq. The protest took place on September 11th, 1992. This is a flyer for Peace and Justice Works event marking 5 years of the Gulf War in 1996, recalling the exact time of the first bombing and asking for a moment of silence, and it also was focusing on the end of the sanctions. Then there's a flyer from the 2001 event marking 10 years since the war began. That event included a timeline stretching from ancient history all the way up to 2001, and included a lot of the information that you've seen up till this point. On March 15, 2003, just 4 days before Iraq War Part 2 began, Portland held a massive peace rally and march in Waterfront Park. The organizers counted over 30,000 people attending, but ended up getting into an argument with the Oregonian, which set the number at 14,000. So here's a photo someone took of just one part of the crowd to disprove the Oregonian's assessment. This was the fourth of what would turn out to be many mass mobilizations organized by a network of groups in Portland, including the March 20, 2004 march and rally, and here's a picture from the Oregonian that shows that massive march clogging up Broadway downtown. But there's also an announcement here for a flyer from the Gulf War 20 Years Later event in 2011, which included a walk over the Hawthorne Bridge. Later that year, based on an agreement signed by President George W. Bush before he left office, President Obama withdrew many American troops from Iraq, but left behind over 16,000 personnel on the world's largest embassy. Peace and Justice Works event in March 2012, marking 9 years of Iraq War II, made note that the U.S. was still, in that sense, occupying the country. Then we have an announcement for a protest from July 26, 2014, about 2 weeks before Iraq War III broke out, and it contextualizes the U.S. buildup of troops in Iraq, signaling that another round of bombing was imminent. Which brings us back to the event that you're going to see excerpts from today, the 25 Years in Iraq demonstration in Pioneer Courthouse Square.
As a concerned citizen, because I believe that our tax dollars are being taken and put into warring, which I'm opposed to. I think that over 1 million people died in the Iraq War for no reason other than the greed of turning our dollar and keeping it into how we transfer funds for oil. I think that we didn't want the petrodollar going to some other currency, and I think that the money makers didn't care and wanted the money to flow back to the hands of a few. I'm here to say I oppose the slaughtering of innocent people with drones. I oppose the terrible mercenary killers that have come and that our contractors have hired. And when we say we have our soldiers and our troops away from the region, I don't believe it. I say we have mercenaries still there doing damage in so many countries, and I don't believe we have a right to trespass internationally when our citizenry needs that money spent at home. And I am a citizen for peace. That's why I'm here today.
I'm here because I have seen too many wars in my life. My husband was a World War II veteran, and that was a terrible war. It caused him a lot of trouble the rest of his life. The people who go to war to fight other countries are inciting the terrorists. That you can't stop terrorism with terrorism. It causes more terrorism. I could have.
I'm sorry about your noise.
Yeah. As I say, violence incites more violence. There are better ways to stop extremists from causing trouble and from killing other people. You can use diplomacy, you can use development, because a lot of the extremism comes out of poor economic conditions. And also we need to become more aware of different cultures. It's a clash of cultures lots of times. It doesn't really have anything so much to do with religion as it does culture. And we need to open our minds to other people's ways of thinking. Maybe we don't agree with them, but we can, if we listen to them and if they listen to us, it is a more productive experience than just fighting, because that just kills more people and creates more wars. That's why I'm here. And I'm not going to quit.
Oh, we thank everybody in Portland for this opportunity to be here, for me to bring my grandson and to teach him about peace. 25 years ago, my son, at 18, led a walkout against the war. 18 he was. Now 25 years, his whole life, we've been engaged in wars. And he was a peace studies major, he's worked for peace. Now we got to teach these little ones. Why are you here, Oliver?
Well, I just think it's time that these wars stop. It's getting crazy.
What do you mean by that? Here's the Union champion.
Well, we keep doing the same things over again with our foreign policy. We need to be more creative and think about building hospitals and schools rather than bombing people with drones and so forth. We speak in classes sometimes with sympathetic teachers, and we just kind of get information out to students as best we can about alternatives to war and military recruiting. Well, it's pretty mixed, but you know, we do on occasion get students who haven't really thought about the issues that much, and so the information is helpful to them.
Good for you. Well, they're all dusty. I think I'm going to have to just like...
Yeah, sure. We changed some minds.
But yeah, I mean, I got to see the Chinese women.
Well, just from talking to kids, you know. I mean,
well, yeah,
for one thing, a lot of the teachers that have us in to speak in their classes have already done some groundwork, you know, in terms of presenting materials in a different way than the average curriculum, and so kids are beginning to think in a different way, and then we bring veterans into the classroom to talk about their experiences, and that has a pretty powerful effect sometimes. Yeah, I've been doing this kind of recruiting work for about 30 years. Well, I was a draft resistor during the Vietnam War, and when I came to Portland, I discovered that some of that work was going on, and I decided I wanted to be a part of it. When I started this work, I was about 45. I'm not sure when I'm going to stop doing it. Well, maybe when I get too old to stand here with a sign. Well, I don't know, but one's got to try.
Well, I'm here because of injustice, because of all the injustice that is going on, from economic injustice to war, which is the greatest injustice of all. You know, I came down here, I started coming down here in 2003 because of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. That was based on lies. It was, the whole war is a war crime. The whole war is a war crime, so, there was no justification for the war at all. That's why I started coming down here. That's why I'm still coming down here, because the war in Iraq really never ended since 1991. All the sanctions and the bombing from American Air Force, it's been nonstop, and so I'm down here still. I'm down here today because of that.
Why don't you listen to it on radio and watch it on television?
Why don't I watch what, the war?
The war or the
well, I'm not sure that I don't, except they don't really show much on television about the war.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they show sanitized versions by, you know, embedded reporters or quotes from the Pentagon. You know, we don't really hear here in America, except from you know, media that is not what I want to say, independent or community-based media.
Is independent?
For instance, radio station KBOO. That's totally independent, non-commercial, and they, you know, we get news from all sorts of people, such as Naomi Klein or Noam Chomsky, you know, various people like that who are very smart. They know what they're talking about, and they're never on mainstream media because corporate America doesn't want to hear that.
I'm here because violence in all forms is madness, and it's indicative of mental illness. If you have violent tendencies towards yourself or others, you belong in a mental health hospital in this country, and unfortunately, if you put on a uniform, it's okay then to have violence against others. So I'm here to stop all the wars and all forms of violence.
All right, I'm here protesting this war, which I've protested before the war began, and I've been protesting against the American war machine and the people who are behind it. It's been a very frustrating road, as we've discovered that really the Democrats and the liberals are actually as into war as anybody else, possibly more. You know, we've got a situation where Hillary Clinton could be president of the United States, and I'd say all our lives are in danger. So God help us. I mean, what brings me here, what keeps me coming, is that if we don't stand up and we don't challenge what's going on, our reality is being made for us. And if we don't change this reality and start putting forward values that mean something, we're all just going to get flushed right down the toilet. And many people already are. I mean, you know, there's a demonstration today right now for all the people who are being forced out of their apartments and they can't afford the rent, and, you know, on it goes. We've got to stick together and not get divided and not let their high-level propaganda games get to us.
Why is it that you're here?
Well, I've been coming to these anti-war demonstrations probably since about 1991. I've lived in Portland for about 40 years. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was an Army medic in Vietnam, so I know what happens in war. I've often said that lying is the most powerful weapon in war. And this is a banner I put together about a year or so ago. The U.S. has bombed 28 countries since the end of World War II. In fact, now it's 30 countries, so you want to add Yemen and Syria. So I came back from Vietnam and I realized that I was the enemy in Vietnam. And that I realized that I was the aggressor in Vietnam. I was the quote-unquote bad guy in Vietnam. I was in a unit that had heavy artillery on 3 fire bases, and another base that had assault helicopters and Cobra gunships, and we fired into free fire zones, killing God only knows how many people.
What does free fire zone mean?
Well, free fire zones, the U.S. set up a situation where they said they created a certain amount of real estate or land that they said this land is designated now as enemy territory, and anybody in this area will be designated as a combatant. And so you had people that were leaving their ancestral lands that they had lived for centuries. And of course, a lot of those people did not leave those ancestral lands. So the United States killed God only knows how many people in those free fire zones. And I have often said, you do not bring the enemy to the peace table by just killing military combatants. You ultimately bring the enemy to the peace table by killing innocent civilians. They are military targets. You know, Howard Zinn made a statement when he said that the United States was responsible for 20 million bomb craters during the Vietnam War. And you can imagine how many thousands of atrocities were committed in making 20 million bomb craters. So it's just important that the American people know that and why we're here today. Because all we've done is move the Vietnam War to the Middle East.
A person here who has brought some extra people here, Dan Hanneman from the Peace and Justice Works. And I will hand this over to Dan Hanneman, who will continue talking about our very special demonstration today. Hi, I'm Dan. I'm with Peace and Justice Works, a Rock Affinity Group. I was there also on January 12th, 1991 here in the square when 12,000 people filled this square and marched against the impending Iraq War. For those who don't remember, George Bush Sr. declared January 15th, Martin Luther King's birthday, as the deadline for Iraq to get out of Kuwait after they had invaded. And the next day, unleashed more bombs that were unleashed in all of World War II on the country of Iraq over the course of 43 days as they attacked the country of Iraq. Sanctions had been put on Iraq immediately after the invasion of Kuwait. Those sanctions stayed in place until after the invasion in 2003 and killed around or more than 1 million people. including 500,000 children. And people who don't remember this, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was asked about the 500,000 children figure and asked if she thought the price was worth it, and she said, yes, we think the price is worth it. That's our U.S. policy summed up right there. We're willing to kill 500,000 children to get to the oil underneath other people's land. So, you know, we're in the middle of the third Iraq War now, where on August 8th, 2014, the U.S. started bombing again, ostensibly to go after ISIS, but it's still more about the U.S. maintaining control, maintaining the world's largest embassy, which is the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and continuing to try to run the world through proxy wars and proxy governments. I've been at this 25 years. You can see my sign. I've been flipping it over every year since the 20th anniversary. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you know, every year we have to come out here again. And I don't want to come out next year, so let's hope that this is the year that we get the U.S. out of Iraq. And also, the second Iraq War, which started on March 19, 2003, also it brought out 30 or 40,000 people down at Waterfront Park. We, Peace and Just Works, helped co-sponsor that. We are going to do an event on March 18th, here again, PPRC's Friday Rally, which is here every week. Every single week since November 2001, they've been out on this corner. So we'll be back on March 18th as a co-sponsor of that event. So mark your calendars now. If anybody's interested, we have a fact sheet that we're handing out, that little blue sheet of paper. We also have, on hanging off the little red wagon of peace, I put together a notebook with historical documents showing some of the major demonstrations and events that happened in the 25 years. And that starts with 1991, the big march we're talking about. It was organized by a group called the Coalition Against U.S. Military Intervention in the Middle East. I want to introduce to you now Shelley Sorensen, who was one of the steering committee members of that coalition, and she's going to say a few words.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. I remember weeping on the same very street when there was a return for veterans of Iraq, and
I'm waiting for a light.
There were planes that dove down so close and were so loud that the anti-war movement on this street was in tears. There was wailing and grief, and for me, the war in Iraq represents that day, that grief, that sadness, and that wailing to see innocent children and innocent people still dying. We need to have a more transparent government. We need to stop drones. We need to stop blatant transgressions into countries that are not our own. We need to feed our own children and our own people. And I'm proud to say that I'm an activist for this cause. I'm very, very disheartened to say it's been 25 years. And my great fear is that the war on terror doesn't seem to have an end in sight, because for me it is not exactly the truth of the matter to say that there are to say that it's a war on terror. I think that this is a very, very different thing. This is a war against impoverished nations, and this is a war to gain more wealth, more concentrated power, more submission over our own citizens. We're in a time where there is a great amount of taking over our privacy and getting into taking information on each and every one of us. And I'm glad to see each and every one of you here. It's brave to come out and just speak your mind and speak your truth and try to be a good citizen and do what your heart tells you to do. War is wrong in this matter, and it simply is. And we need a leader who will lead us to peace. And I'm thankful that you're all here with me today in solidarity.
Thank you, Shelley. Good afternoon, Portland. We are on the march again. This is the Portland Equal Response. We've been out here every Friday since shortly after 9/11. We've got 730 plus Fridays trying to protest, bring consciousness. These wars that we're being conducted are not in the interest of the American people.